Hello, my name is Christy Breitling, and my topic revolved around the issue of discussion posts for engagement. My classroom problem was that I was finding that students were not motivated or engaged in classroom activities unless they knew it was something for a grade. I teach 7th grade American history, and so students can struggle finding why this topic is relevant to their real life, even when I make the connection for them. They aren't necessarily willing to think deeply about the topic. So that was what I was looking to try to solve in this project. As I did my researching, I used these, what you can see here, to search the different databases, whole variety, and they all were talking about engaging and motivating. And specifically then I looked at social studies and history to see if there was anything different about that. When I did my annotated bibliography, I found 5 themes that much of the research revolved around. The first theme is students collaborating. When they collaborate, the research showed that they had deeper meaning and they were willing to work harder because they knew their peers were going to be seeing their work. I also found in the research that technology can be engaging and motivating for students. That's what they're used to, that's what they want to use. I also found that incorporating technology, basically what this theme is talking about is that you can take what you typically do and add things to it to transform them into something new. So there was one of the research that I found that talked about students creating a PowerPoint, but also blogging as they were creating this PowerPoint to bounce ideas off of each other. The teacher's role in technology was, in the research I found, really the role of a facilitator, and that teachers needed to step back and let the technology happen and not control it. Finally, specific technologies used by teachers. This really was, you can incorporate technology in a variety of different ways. So the research talked a lot about PowerPoint. They also mentioned the Google Drive and specifically Google Docs. A lot of just being on the lookout for new apps. Virtual reality was also mentioned, as so was game design, creating games. The 3 plans that I looked into, implementation plan number 1 revolved around using a Google Doc collaborative assignment. And so what this would entail is the teacher creating a problem that students would try to figure out. And this you can see the research that it came from. They did this with college students and nursing students specifically to find out health problems. And so students had to work together. They all had different pieces of information. They had to ask each other questions and work together to solve this problem. It was appealing to me. However, the concern was, what would I have as the higher level thinking problem that would take numerous days for students to figure out while working together? And I was concerned that I would have to monitor over 40 different documents of students because if they had questions of me, they were supposed to add me in the comments, and I would then need to check and respond to them. And I was concerned I wouldn't be able to do that. Implementation plan number 2 revolved around the work of Hodges and McTeague, and this involved literacy stations. I've done stations before, just not specifically with technology in mind, and so I thought this would be interesting. To use Quizlet, something I've used before, Google Expeditions for virtual field trips, which I have not used, which was appealing. And then the other appealing part about this was that I would be able to have students do a variety of different technologies, which might be a reading activity where they would have to record themselves, or listening option. And then I could add other stations. The problem I found with this, the concern I had, is that it was not a daily event. And I wanted something that was routine and would happen each day in the classroom. So this was not chosen. The implementation plan 3 that I did go with involved using blogging and Schoology for students to blog and then respond to others' posts. I like this because it allowed for review and extension. It allowed for students to think like a historian, which comes from the research of De La Paz, 2013. I also thought that students would be easily monitored, which is something that my technology integrationist stressed when I talked to him, that you should definitely monitor students' responses to make sure that they're academic. And Bromley also mentioned the importance that students be able to look up stuff they don't know and to help construct relevant meaning for themselves. And so that's what made this implementation plan the one I ended up going with. So the timeline, you can see that I went with the idea of go slow to go fast. So week 1 was how to post academically and then also start how to respond academically. And I started with the response starters. I agree with, fill in the blank, because. I disagree with, fill in the blank, because. In week 2, I added in 2 more response starters to add. The first one was to add to what you're saying, blank. I also think, blank. I can connect to this, fill in the blank, because. So those are my 4 go-to response starters. And in weeks 1 and 2, we worked on that. And I really focused on monitoring at this point. Week 3 and 4 were really all about maintaining and maintenance of the posts, making sure that they were getting the idea of academically posting and responding to each other. So how did the weeks go? Week 1 went really smoothly. I was very nervous about students being foolish or silly or even mean to each other on these posts and responses. And I was pleasantly surprised that none of that happened in week 1. And students were very respectful. They use this platform very easily. Schoology is something we're comfortable with, we use. So using a discussion post was just a new feature on Schoology to use. I was very keen on monitoring and making sure that students were academically posting, and they did. The slow rollout of the response starters fit really well with what I needed to have happen. And, just overall, it worked really well. I was very thankful for the implementation timeline that I had created and put the time and thought into, because it allowed me, I wasn't in routine yet for this, so it allowed me to grab one and use it for that day, because sometimes I needed it at the last second. Here is the discussion post for the week. So this is what it would look like for students. I only opened one each day, but this is overall what they look like. So you can see. This is students responding to each other. So you can see I had a first student at the top there. This was from 3.5, and you can see that the title or the topic is on the side here. What does a country need to do in order to be prepared for war? They were supposed to list 3 things. I was not having them respond to each other at this point, so they just had to list, and then they had to look through the list to see what others had said. Here's another one from later in the week, and then this one I had them start responding. So this is a response chain that to why do you think some countries are stronger than others in a game that we played. And so the response, the post, and then I agree with you, I agree, lots of I agree on this one. So week number 2, continue to roll out the response starters. We really focused on complete sentences for posts and responses in this week. In hindsight, I'm not sure that that is something I would focus on again. I think complete sentences would make my English teachers very happy, but it was not something that students did very naturally. I think with posts, they think of just a quick response. However, my biggest problem this week was finding enough time to complete both the posts and responses. Students need at least 5 minutes, possibly more. The problem is they kind of rush through it. And then finally, we took our first assessment, and I had hoped that we would our scores would improve, and I did not see that with this. I'll talk more about that in the findings. And here we have the discussions for the week. Here we have an example of student work and their statements. And here we have another one with to add to. That was a new response starter that was used. Week 3, I was noticing some students were maybe getting bored with this idea of doing this every day. So I thought about using opinion statements versus fact. So just to get more interest, just to try something different. That's also the benefit of doing discussion posts because I have a lot of variety that I can use. There was a little bit of private conversations, basically with some students because they weren't posting I started to notice. So just some private conversations I had with students to make sure that they were posting. Some never did, but majority did. Here is the discussion post. We had our small spring break this week, so we were short 2 days. Here is, I had my first not so academic response, so I just responded back to them. I didn't have much of this, but here's an example of what I had. Here's a much better post, comments, and then responses. Week 4, again, worked really well. The discussion posts, I moved them to the starter class this time, so that was really effective, and I think if I do discussion posts again, it would definitely keep them at the beginning of class. It allowed for more time. Students weren't in a hurry to get out. And again, inappropriate posts were almost non-existent. Here we have the posts for this week. Here we have an example. We had moved on to the Great Depression. The evaluation of the impact, I really found that students were very engaged in the learning process. The discussion posts were incorporated by nearly all students. In fact, 90% of students reported that they responded every day to the posts. And the discussion posts didn't, as I mentioned before, did not increase test scores on either of the quizzes I gave. On the second test on the Great Depression and the 1920s, there was a 1% increase, which I would not assume to be significant, statistically significant. But I did feel that students were able to work on the other skills of creativity, of critical thinking skills, of writing skills that aren't as easily measured on a test. Strengths of this whole process is that it really allowed for a lot of flexibility. It could be easily modified by me if I found that discussion posts weren't working so well or the wording of them wasn't so good. I could quickly change it up. Students were already familiar with this. It was easy to monitor. It allowed them to work on their writing and their historical reasoning skills in the process. Weaknesses, I could see how discussion posts could be overused. Students by the end were ready to move on to something else. I think I definitely would use them again. I just won't use them every day. And unfortunately, it did not increase academic achievement, as I mentioned, but I think there was other value to it. Here is a list of my references. I did highlight the ones that I used in my research throughout from this annotated bibliography. You see there's a few more. And the rest of them. All right. And so overall, in conclusion, I really found that that this whole process was a great. I really found that this whole process allowed for a lot of planning to happen in the onset. And then it also allowed for a lot of reflection each week and then little modifications to be made. And I really appreciated doing the research beforehand because I don't think I would have thought about doing discussion blog posts as a way to motivate students. And so the research helped me as well to be able to find something that I hadn't thought of using before. And I would definitely use this process again because it felt very put together and organized, and I was able to evaluate the evidence from that. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.